Love in the Night by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. Chapter 1. The words thrilled Val. They had come into his mind some time during the fresh gold April afternoon, and he kept repeating them to himself over and over. Love in the night. Love in the night. He tried them in 3 languages, Russian, French, and English, and decided that they were best in English. In each language they meant a different sort of love and a different sort of night. The English night seemed the warmest and softest, with the thinnest and most crystalline sprinkling of stars. The English love seemed the most fragile and romantic, a white dress and a dim face above it and eyes that were pools of light. And when I add that it was a French night he was thinking about, after all, I see I must go back and begin over. Val was half Russian and half American. His mother was the daughter of that Morris Hasselton who helped finance the Chicago World's Fair in 1892, and his father was, see the Almanac de Gotha, issue of 1910, Prince Paul Serge Boris Rostov, son of Prince Vladimir Rostov, grandson of a Grand Duke, Jimber Jod Serge, and third cousin once removed to the Tsar. It was all very impressive, you see, on that side. House in St. Petersburg, shooting lodge near Riga, and swollen villa, more like a palace, overlooking the Mediterranean. It was at this villa in Cannes that the Rostovs passed the winter, and it wasn't at all the thing to remind Princess Rostov that this Riviera villa, from the marble fountain, after Bernini, to the gold cordial glasses, after dinner, was paid for with American gold. The Russians, of course, were gay people on the continent in the gala days before the war. Of the 3 races that used southern France for a pleasure ground, they were easily the most adept at the grand manner. The English were too practical, and the Americans, though they spent freely, had no tradition of romantic conduct. But the Russians, there was a people as gallant as the Latins, and rich besides. When the Rostovs arrived at Cannes late in January, the restaurateurs telegraphed north for the prince's favorite labels to paste on their champagne, and the jewelers put incredibly gorgeous articles aside to show to him, but not to the princess, and the Russian church was swept and garnished for the season that the prince might beg Orthodox forgiveness for his sins. Even the Mediterranean turned obligingly to a deep wine color in the spring evenings, and fishing boats with robin-breasted sails loitered exquisitely offshore. In a vague way, young Val realized that this was all for the benefit of him and his family. It was a privileged paradise, this white little city on the water, in which he was free to do what he liked because he was rich and young and the blood of Peter the Great ran indigo in his veins. He was only 17 in 1914, when this history begins, but he had already fought a duel with a young man 4 years his senior, and he had a small hairless scar to show for it on top of his handsome head. But the question of love in the night was the thing nearest his heart. It was a vague, pleasant dream he had, something that was going to happen to him some day that would be unique and incomparable. He could have told no more about it than that there was a lovely unknown girl concerned in it, and that it ought to take place beneath the Riviera moon. The odd thing about all this was not that he had this excited and yet almost spiritual hope of romance, for all boys of any imagination have just such hopes, but that it actually came true. And when it happened so unexpectedly. It was such a jumble of impressions and emotions, of curious phrases that sprang to his lips, of sights and sounds and moments that were here, were lost, were past, that he scarcely understood it at all. Perhaps its very vagueness preserved it in his heart and made him forever unable to forget. There was an atmosphere of love all about him that spring. His father's loves, for instance, which were many and indiscreet, and which Val became aware of gradually from overhearing the gossip of servants, and definitely from coming on his American mother unexpectedly one afternoon, to find her storming hysterically at his father's picture on the salon wall. In the picture, his father wore a white uniform with a furred dolman and looked back impassively at his wife as if to say, "Were you under the impression, my dear, that you were marrying into a family of clergymen?" Val tiptoed away, surprised, confused, and excited. It didn't shock him as it would have shocked an American boy of his age. He had known for years what life was among the continental rich, and he condemned his father only for making his mother cry. Love went on around him, reproachless love and illicit love alike. As he strolled along the seaside promenade at 9 o'clock, when the stars were bright enough to compete with the bright lamps, he was aware of love on every side. From the open-air cafes, vivid with dresses just down from Paris, came a sweet pungent odor of flowers and chartreuse and fresh black coffee and cigarettes, and mingled with them all he caught another scent, the mysterious thrilling scent of love. Hands touched jewel-sparkling hands upon the white tables. Gay dresses and white shirt fronts swayed together, and matches were held, trembling a little, for slow lighting cigarettes. On the other side of the boulevard, lovers less fashionable, young Frenchmen who worked in the stores of Cannes, sauntered with their fiancées under the dim trees, but Val's young eyes seldom turned that way. The luxury of music and bright colors and low voices, they were all part of his dream. They were the essential trappings of love in the night. But assume as he might the rather fierce expression that was expected from a young Russian gentleman who walked the streets alone, Val was beginning to be unhappy. April twilight had succeeded March twilight, the season was almost over, and he had found no use to make of the warm spring evenings. The girls of 16 and 17 whom he knew were chaperoned with care between dusk and bedtime. This, remember, was before the war, and the others who might gladly have walked beside him were an affront to his romantic desire. So April passed by, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He had played tennis until 7 and loitered at the courts for another hour. So it was 8:30 when a tired cab horse accomplished the hill on which gleamed the facade of the Rostov villa. The lights of his mother's limousine were yellow in the drive, and the princess, buttoning her gloves, was just coming out the glowing door. Val tossed 2 francs to the cabman and went to kiss her on the cheek. "Don't touch me," she said quickly. "You've been handling money." "But not in my mouth, mother," he protested humorously. The princess looked at him impatiently. "I'm angry," she said. "Why must you be so late tonight? We're dining on a yacht and you were to have come along too." "What yacht?" "Americans." There was always a faint irony in her voice when she mentioned the land of her nativity. Her America was the Chicago of the 90s, which she still thought of as the vast upstairs to a butcher shop. Even the irregularities of Prince Paul were not too high a price to have paid for her escape. "2 yachts," she continued. "In fact, we don't know which one." The note was very indefinite. Very careless indeed. Americans. Val's mother had taught him to look down on Americans, but she hadn't succeeded in making him dislike them. "American men noticed you," even if you were 17. He liked Americans. Although he was thoroughly Russian, he wasn't immaculately so. The exact proportion, like that of a celebrated soap, was about 99.75%. I want to come, he said. I'll hurry up, Mother. We're late now. The princess turned as her husband appeared in the door. Now Val says he wants to come. He can't, said Prince Paul shortly. He's too outrageously late. Val nodded. Russian aristocrats, however indulgent about themselves, were always admirably Spartan with their children. There were no arguments. I'm sorry, he said. Prince Paul grunted. The footman, in red and silver livery, opened the limousine door. But the grunt decided the matter for Val, because Princess Rostov at that day and hour had certain grievances against her husband which gave her command of the domestic situation. On second thought, you'd better come, Val, she announced coolly. It's too late now, but come after dinner. The yacht is either the Minnehaha or the privateer. She got into the limousine. The one to come to will be the gayer one. I suppose, the Jackson's yacht. Find got sense, muttered the prince cryptically, conveying that Val would find it if he had any sense. Have my man take a look at you, 'fore you start. Wear tie of mine, 'stead of that outrageous string you affected in Vienna. Grow up. High time. As the limousine crawled crackling down the pebbled drive, Val's face was burning.